All right, good. We are recording. I'm going to share my screen. And this morning, let me know if you cannot see that, but hopefully you should be able to. This morning, we're really going to dig into using data for decision making. This is really kind of what the topic and what we're all about this morning. And it really starts with setting up very efficient decision systems. So as I go through this, think about how you collect your discipline data, what application, what platform, what method and means do you go ahead and collect data? What data are you collecting? Are you collecting the right amount of data to use that data for decision making and be efficient with our decision making and action planning? So we are going to cover pretty much all of these bullet points here. That very first check mark here, team foundations. This work is actually from TIPS, and I'll jump back to this slide in a minute, but I want to show you this slide. TIPS stands for Team Initiated Problem Solving. You may not have heard of it. It was developed out of a federal grant out of the University of Oregon several years ago, probably about maybe 10 years ago or so, 11 years ago. And they were working with schools in their region. And what they were finding is they were meeting with teams, their PBIS teams, because PBIS was up and humming along there. And they were finding that the teams were not being very efficient and effective with their time and their meeting time. They were doing a lot of party planning. They were talking about celebrations. They really weren't using any data for decision making. So they received a federal grant. And as a result of this, they developed TIPS. TIPS is two pieces. There's team initiated problems, there's team foundations, and then there's problem solving process. So when we talk about TIPS, it's kind of two pronged. This first check mark here is all the foundations. We're not going to go into that this morning. That's basically who's on your team, when does your team meet, you know, the roles, do we have roles and responsibilities defined? Do we know who the minute taker is? Do we know who the data analyst is? Do we have an agenda? Where are we keeping these meeting notes? Those are all those foundational pieces. That's another whole piece we're not going to cover this morning, but that's the first half of it. The other piece is the problem solving process, and that is what we're going to cover this morning. Everything from defining your problems with precision to now defining a goal, starting to build an action plan around that, and then we'll talk about fidelity and then outcome measures. So all of these bullet points here on this slide are what we're going to cover this morning, which is just the problem solving process, which is part of TIPS. This is the TIPS model. And you can see here as we go through, it starts here, it's a little bit small, but it starts at the top with identifying your problem with precision, then setting your goal, developing your action plan, and so on. So we're going to go through all of these pieces in this cycle of the TIPS problem solving process. So we'll start a little bit on using data for decision making. We know that decisions are more likely going to be effective and efficient when they're based upon data than if they're based upon, yeah, something's not right here. We need more data to tell us really what's going on. You may hear in your school that a lot of staff members are saying, boy, our cafeteria is just really out of control. That might be true, but we need more specific information about what's going on in the cafeteria. You know, what is the problem behavior? Who's causing all the action? When is it happening? Why is it happening? We need to get very specific in our data to help us build a solution. You know, another analogy is if you go to the doctor's office, they don't just simply take your blood pressure and then say, yeah, we're going to take your appendix out. So he or she or doctor will do more specific tests. They want to be as informed as possible before they make a decision on what healthcare you need. Well, it's kind of very similar. We need to be real specific before we can make an action plan and decisions based on data. So we know that we really need to base our decisions on data. And the quality of that decision making really depends on the precision and the clarity. We really need to get precise with our problem behaviors and have a full understanding of what's going on. So in this presentation this morning, you will see some behavior graphs. You will see from Swiss. So what we're going to do is show you some tier 1 graphs. You may not use Swiss. I'm not sure what system you guys are using, but the graphs that we use in our presentations for data are Swiss. And I'm not sure, do you guys use Swiss or use a different, Jay, do you guys use something different, a different application or format? Oh, maybe I lost Jay, but anyway, so I'm just going to show you that you will see some graphs and they will be Swiss. So Swiss standing for School-Wide Information System, which is a web-based application that does nothing but track office referral data. So that's what you'll see. And we're going to focus on all the tier 1 graphs. So looking at tier 1 data at the universal level. So we know that we want to use our data to help us ask the right questions. They don't really provide us a solution, but it leads us to identifying what our problems are, refining those problems, and then defining the questions that will lead to a solution. So it helps us put the problem in the local context rather than, pointing our fingers at the student. So it looks at the context of where this problem behavior is occurring. So let's look at a little bit around using data for decision making. When we talk about using data for decision making, there's various ways to be able to use it. You can use it as a screening tool. So it can be a universal screening tool where we are, looking at the proportion of students with 0 to 1 office referrals, students with 2 to 5 office referrals, students with 6 or more office referrals. So it can be used as that type of a tool to indicate which students might need some higher level supports. It's also a progress monitoring tool. So we are developing an action plan based around a particular problem in a specific context. We want to assess the progress of that action plan or that intervention. We can use and gather our data to let us know how things are going. Are they better? So it can certainly be used as a progress monitoring tool. Also at looking at, data over time. So looking at large date range, we might look at data over a month of time, a semester, a year, to really help us monitor our problem behaviors, take a look at some of our trends. Are we seeing problem behaviors occurring in a particular month, a particular day of the week? So we can look at that over time. So there we are. All righty. So we talk about using it as kind of a universal screening tool. This is an example of that. So this is a report from Swiss where it's referrals by students. So now we can pull this report and we can see when we look at this report, and this is from September to November. So this is about a 2-month period of time. We can see here that we've got one student that definitely his data is showing that he could definitely benefit from some tier 3 supports. He has already, it looks like 11 office referrals in this 2-month period of time. It also can help us identify a group of students that are somewhere between that 2 to 5 range that could benefit from some higher level tier 2 interventions. So again, if you're implementing higher level interventions, this is a good screening tool, be able to use this data to help us indicate which students are needing higher levels of support. In tier 2, this could be check and check out, could be we have a social skills group, we have a mentoring program, could be any number of these interventions that we have in place in our building. This screening tool, this data is helping us determine which students are in need of these higher level supports. And then of course you see the other students with 0 to 1, which tells me, all of these students in the green, that what we are implementing with tier 1 is effective. That's sufficient for these kiddos. They don't need anything else. They don't need higher level supports. All of our tier 1 implementation components are good for them and sufficient. We don't need to do anything more for these students. When we look at this data, however, we always want to put it and think of kind of that rule of 10. If when you're starting to look at your discipline data, you're seeing that it's involving 10 or more students in that same context, then that's a systems issue and we need to provide a response based around the system. Versus if it's less than 10, that's more of an individual student response. So I mentioned cafeteria out of control. If we start to look at our data and we're seeing that the cafeteria is now involving a large number of students in the first lunch, then this becomes a systems issue. So if we're talking more than 10 students in that first lunch every day, then we've got a systems issue in that first lunch in the cafeteria, and we need to provide a systems response to that. So it's kind of that rule of 10. whether it's an individual student or a systems response. And this question comes up a lot. So when should we start screening? When should we start looking at that universal data? When should we start to determine when a student needs additional supports? And they actually did a study around this. It's a little bit old now. This is 2010, but I mean, 2010 seems like yesterday, but it's been a while. And what they found is that if we did nothing throughout the school year, we did absolutely nothing. This is the trajectory, especially for these students with 6 or more, are going to take throughout the year. Here's our students with 0 to 1. They're humming along. They're doing fine. Here's our students that would need some type of a tier 2 intervention. Here's tier 3. And if we've done nothing and put no interventions in place, their trajectory doesn't look good. And they really climb the charts in office referrals as the school year goes by. So what they found is that the differences we find out pretty quickly, usually by October, which students need some additional supports, and they become clear in October. So they kind of term this the October catch, that you really want to start to catch these students that are needing some additional supports by October. And what they found in this October catch, as you can see, now there it is if we did nothing. And here now you can see if we're starting to put interventions in place in each of these months, how the trajectory really decreases. I mean, it definitely is a decrease for our students in tier 2. They saw a 20% decrease, and definitely a 30% decrease in students needing tier 3. So if you think of looking at this data, if this were a school of 500 students, that could mean 150 fewer referrals, which is a lot, which saves, between 25 and 75 hours of staff time per year, which is also a lot. So we want to catch these kids early, catch them by October, check this data out, continually monitor them throughout the year, and implement these interventions as needed throughout the year to decrease their potential office referrals they're going to get, save us time, and have them end the year in a much better place. So October is always kind of that. By Halloween, usually, Rob Horner used to say, by Halloween, we really need these kids in some kind of an intervention. So that always kind of stuck in my head, kind of by Halloween or that October catch. So we're going to look at some SWIS reports. And again, think about, if you're not using SWIS, you're using a different system, just think about your system. Kind of just do a comparison. Does your system provide these similar types of reports and graphs? Are they easy to access? We talk about having a data analyst on your team. Does your data analyst have access to these reports, to this data? So this is just a snapshot of the reports, some of the reports that are available in SWIS. These are check and checkout reports, but here's all your SWIS school-wide reports. And you can see there's core reports, and the core reports are here. We're going to take a look at those in a little bit bigger graph, you can see. And then additional reports. Additional reports are some multi-year. So if you keep your data in SWIS year to year, you will see some, comparing year to year. What our problem behaviors were last year, what are they this year, what were they the year before? Same for location and average referrals per day per month. So there's a lot of reports that are available through this application. These are the core reports. And when we talk about using data for decision making, this is really where you want to start, is with these core reports. And the core reports, at least in SWIS, are the average referrals per day per month, the referrals by problem behavior, by location, by time, by student, by day of week, and by grade. So in schools that have a SWIS account, excuse me, they log in, and this is the first thing they see on their dashboard are these core reports. And it's kind of a snapshot of what's going on with our school, with our discipline data. We can see pretty quickly if there's any one particular grade that's getting more referrals, any one particular day of the week. What's our biggest problem behaviors? Is there a certain time of day? It gives you a good snapshot of what's going on with our school. And it's a good place to start when we want to start and we talk about using our data for decision making. Here's some other reports. These are some of these additional reports. So you're here's location multi-year, average referrals per day per month. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that graph in a minute. and why we call it the average referrals per day per month, and not want to look at the total referrals, but averaging. And then by the problem behavior, and then this is by staff. We always say that this is an extra report that is available for admin eyes only. So there's different access levels in Swiss. Admin sees all the reports. If I were a data entry person, I would just have data entry access. If I were a data analyst, I would just see reports, but not this one, which is referrals by staff. Here's also some additional reports. You can see there's ethnicity or equity reports. There's year-end reports. This here in the lower right side is your triangle data report. So this is what your triangle looks like in your school. So we talk about in the number and percentage of students with 0 to 1 office referrals in the green, students with 2 to 5 office referrals in the yellow, students with 6 or more in the red. So now you can compare your data. I know if you've been to any PBIS presentation, you've probably seen the triangle where we show that students with 0 to 1 office referrals, if we implement tier 1 supports with Fidelity, it's going to be sufficient for 80% of your students. So now you can look at your triangle data and see what percentage of students are we reaching with our tier 1 supports. It might be more than 80. It could be, you know, I've worked with schools that had 92% of their students that were in green, that tier 1 supports were all that they needed. And then you can see the number and percentage of students needing tier 2 and needing tier 3. And again, if we attach referrals to it, this is 0 to 1, 2 to 5, or 6 or more. So this gives you your triangle data as kind of a comparison. There's another report where you see your triangle data here, where it actually looks like a triangle. And you see not only the graph, but there's always a data table attached to it that now gives you the number and percentage of students with 0 to 1, 2 to 5, or 6 or more. So it's a nice comparison to see how are we doing at implementing our tier 1 supports. It really all kind of goes back to tier 1. I've worked with schools, and I will hear most of the kids in the school need higher level supports. And at that point, we take a breath, take a step back and say, we need to reflect and take a look and see what's happening at tier 1, because not everyone in your school should need higher level supports. So it's really all about investing in tier 1, implementing those supports with Fidelity to grab the majority of your kids. That's all they're going to need. And then those kids that truly need some additional supports in the way of tier 2 and tier 3, we have the folks available to be able to provide those supports. It's not overwhelming. It's not the whole school. So it's really comes down to all about tier 1. But anyway, this is just a part of a year-end report that's also available in Swiss. And then one more, there's just a student dashboard where we can get a comprehensive report on any one student. And it takes pretty much everything that's been entered into Swiss on the student and puts it in one comprehensive report. You see all of his graphs, all of his summary, how many referrals he's had over the years. It's a really big comprehensive report. So I'd love to hear from you guys at this point, and just know, first of all, what do you guys use for collecting your data? Are the reports that are generated similar to what you just saw? And my bigger question here is, does your data analyst on your team have access to these reports? So I'd love to hear if somebody could just come off mute. I would love to hear that, just to kind of touch base at this point on how you guys are tracking your data.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sure, Diane. So, and I'm going to start by saying I'm a new coach this year in our high school, and we actually are just implementing our tier 2 and tier 3 levels at the high school this year. So a lot of this is going to be new, but we are using Panorama for a big piece of our data. And then we also just have our regular school tool tracking system where our discipline data is, and discipline and attendance data are stored. And then Panorama where our SEL and some of our academic data is stored. So we have a lot of those similar reports. I'm just now getting into seeing some more of them in detail as it's a new role for me. And we have a small team now that's really going to dive into those reports on a weekly, basically a bi-weekly basis. But I'll be looking at them on a daily basis, and our team will be looking at them on a bi-weekly basis, along
Perfect.
with
And
our administration along there.
yep, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing, Michelle. I appreciate that. And yeah, as we go forward for the rest of our time together and you see this information, it's all applicable to, if you get similar reports, it's all applicable. We are just showing you, saying this is, we're demonstrating and showing you these Swiss reports. But if you have a system that is able to generate very similar type of reports, then the rest of this information is very applicable. There's nothing that I'm going to present from here on out that would say, oh, I don't know if we can do that. So again, always reflect on your system. I think my biggest piece is making sure that the data analyst on your team has access. So Michelle's team, whoever's that data analyst, did they have the access to be able to get into these reports, or is there somebody they need to go to? So if I'm the data analyst, do I have to go to the team leader, or do I have to go to the assistant principal or the dean? Or is there a way to give that data analyst access to be able to get in and access those reports? So I think that's a big key. You want to make sure that it's easy for your data analyst to access this data, because this is the person that we're going to ask to get in and aggregate this data and develop a precision problem statement that we're going to get to in here in a little bit prior to your team meeting. So we want them to be able to have the time and the access to get in, look at your data, aggregate it, develop a precision problem statement, bring that to your team when your team meets. So we're not spending your time at your meeting just looking at our data. And I've sat through teams meetings like that. I've joined team meetings and they spend their whole time starting to now look at their data, and they say, oh, this is going on, this is going on, oh, this doesn't look good. And then their meeting's over and they've done nothing to do any kind of problem solving or action planning around all of what they're seeing in their data. So, all right, so that's good. I mean, as long as you've got a system, regardless of what that is, that comes up with very similar reports, then the rest of this information will be very applicable. It doesn't have to be Swiss. So it really starts with identifying your current status and what some of your potential problems are. So it really is just this continuous quality improvement. When I see this, excuse me, it reminds me of back when I was in my district, and at that time they were all about PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, and it was a very similar diagram and drawing, and that's what it kind of reminds me of. And it's all very similar. It's just we need to evaluate, we need to plan, we need to implement, and it's just a continuous cycle. After we implement, we evaluate again. We continue or make a new plan, we implement. So it's just a continuous cycle, and we're going to go through, and again, this is the TIPS problem solving process. So what we are going to go through is each of these pieces, starting with identifying the problem with precision. So we'll keep referring back to this graphic we're going to use, that's going to represent database decision making. I think it's a good one, and we're going to go through each of these pieces of the problem solving process. So it starts with identifying our problems with precision. I mentioned a little bit earlier, boy, our cafeteria is out of control. All right, we need to define what's going on in the cafeteria with precision. So what data should your teams monitor? So here's an example of just some data, and there's a lot out there, and we collect a lot of data on what your teams should monitor. You've certainly got referral data. We saw all that in those core reports. What are the problem behaviors, the time of day, the grade, the location? Those are all those core reports. We also can look at our referrals per day per month, our OSS, if we have out of school suspension data, in school suspension data. There's attendance, there's teacher reports. We may do other universal screeners. We may have a different universal screener that we're using to identify students in need of higher level supports. Your team, your PBIS team, may take the tiered fidelity inventory. Actually, that's where we're going to focus our presentation this afternoon on the TFI. It's going to be pretty much all about the tiered fidelity inventory, going through those items, having a good, clear understanding of that inventory, which is absolutely key and one of the big ones we encourage in the Midwest region in our network for our teams to take is the tiered fidelity inventory. And then we have just a couple of examples of schools and how they did some problem solving around that. So that's all this afternoon. If you're going to be on, it's all going to be about the TFI. But you'll see there's a lot of different fidelity measures. And actually, and I'll talk more about this afternoon, but when they developed the tiered fidelity inventory for teams, they really took the best of all of these, the team implementation checklist, the SET survey, the benchmarks of quality. They took the best of all of these various surveys and incorporated them into one, which I think was amazing, because I truly remember back to when I was an external coach in my district, and I would meet with my coaches. I'd have a coaches meeting, and I'd actually have to have a data day, just a whole day where I could go through with all of my coaches what the tick is, when we take it, why we take it, what do we do with the graphs, what does it mean? How about the SET survey? How about the benchmarks of quality? There was the benchmarks of advanced tiers. There was so many different surveys. And so it was just really nice to see that they took the best of these various surveys, and they're now all incorporated in the tiered fidelity inventory. So fidelity tools, there's a lot out there, but basically answering this question, are we doing what we plan to do? And as I said, we'll talk more about that in our afternoon session. And then the question we need to answer is, do we have a problem? When we're starting to look at all of our data, do we see problem indicators? So as we start to identify our problems, we want to always begin with, what's our current status? What's going on right now? What are our levels? Are we seeing any trends over time? Any peaks or valleys of our data, our discipline data? How does it compare this year with last year? How are we doing last year? How are we doing this year? How is our data comparing with what's going on with other schools similar to ours? So comparing our data with the national and regional norms. How does it compare with what, our preferred or expected status? Do we need any additional data beyond that? So this is a good place where we need to start, is looking at what our current status is and starting to build our precision problem statement. This is what your data analyst will be doing prior to your meeting. We don't want to spend our meeting time looking at your problem behavior data. Have your data analyst have an opportunity to get in, to start to aggregate data, start to develop and build this precision problem statement to bring to your team. So then you are spending your precious team meeting minutes. They're not long, and sometimes you only meet once a month, but you're spending that time developing a solid action plan based on that precision statement. So data analyst, huge job. Get the right person in that role. Get your data geek, get your person who loves data and loves to get in and do a little drilling and data mining and get to really what's going on. And that is building a precision problem statement. So we move to precision. We're moving from a primary statement to a precision statement. Many of problems that we hear about in our school are often framed in what we say a primary format. So basically that means that there's a shared concern, but it's not useful for problem solving. The cafeteria, I'll go back to that again. Cafeteria is out of control. Cafeteria is a mess. Oh my gosh, I don't even like going down there. I just have my kids go in and I leave. Woo, get out of that way. Okay, so we all have a shared concern for something happening in the cafeteria. That's primary. That's like, yeah, cafeteria, woo, it's a mess. We need to find out more about it. That's not very useful for problem solving, because as a team member, I don't even know where would we begin to start to action plan around cafeteria being a hot mess. We need more information to help us make better decisions. So from there, we need to start to create a precision problem statement so we can all work on the same problem under those same basic assumptions. We all need a clear understanding of what's going on in the cafeteria. So we want to go from primary to precision. A precise problem statement answers these questions. What's the problem behavior? How often is it happening? Where is the problem behavior happening? Excuse me, who's engaged in the problem behavior? When is it most likely to occur? And why the problem behavior is sustaining. The why is really a key piece. That's perceived motivation. And one thing to check in your particular data system that you're keeping your referral data. Do you collect and do you track perceived motivation? Do you track the why of a problem behavior? If I'm entering an office referral into Panorama, into your system, is perceived motivation a required field? In Swiss, it is. In Swiss, that's a required field. We need teachers when they are completing the referral to indicate, why. I mean, it's a pretty important question because it helps us understand the motivation around this problem behavior in this particular context. So something to think about, to jot down, does our system include why the problem behavior is sustaining? But that's kind of that last piece of information that's pretty crucial in helping us start to develop action plans around precision statements. So we want to go from primary to precise. So from primary problem statements to precision statements. So here's some primary statements, okay? And I'll go ahead and put these up. We'll take a look at them so you can see, okay? We have too many referrals. Gang behavior is increasing. The cafeteria is out of control. Student disrespect occurs way too often in the school. We have some really disrespectful students. Those all may be true. We are all kind of thinking that same thing, but we need to get more precise. It's just too impossible and tough to develop action plans around very primary, broad, global statements. We need precision, such as there are more office referrals for aggression on the playground than last year. These are most likely to occur during first recess with a large number of students, and the aggression is related to getting access to the new playground equipment. Wow, that's a great precision statement. So in this school, they had no playground equipment, and Booster Club had fundraisers. They raised money, raffles, and over the weekend, they installed some beautiful, bright, shiny, colorful playground equipment where there was none before. It was an open field. So now kids come out during first recess. Have you ever heard, and again, another Rob Hornerism, if you can predict it, you can prevent it. Clearly, this school didn't predict what would happen. Kids go outside first recess. Oh my goodness, what's that on our open field? It's playground equipment. Wow. And you know what broke loose? And everybody's pushing and shoving and a lot of aggression, trying to access that equipment. And so we didn't predict, in the school, they did not predict what might happen and how we need to maybe develop a teaching plan on how to teach students how to access this new equipment. We never had it before, so this is something new. So now we can do something with this precision statement. Otherwise, the primary statement could have been, boy, those kids are really fighting a lot on the playground. Well, now we know exactly what's going on. So it's all about defining with precision. And I'll go ahead and put these up as well. So we know that we have more office referrals for aggression. It's happening on the playground. It's a large number of students. So what does that tell us? It's a systems issue. It's definitely more than 10 in that context. It's happening during first recess, but you know what? If we didn't do anything about it, it would happen with the second recess, the third recess, and it would certainly happen when those kids are outside at lunch. And why? That's the big piece. So, okay, we know all this is happening. Why? Why are suddenly we having all this aggressive behavior on the playground with lots of kids? Oh, they're trying to get access to new playground equipment. So now as a team, we can start to develop an action plan for teaching the students the correct way to access this playground equipment, how to utilize it correctly, working in our playground expectations, and we're good to go. So it really all comes down to defining your problems with precision. So, and I'll just go through these. We won't need to do if we were in person, we kind of have little cards that say primary, precise, but we'll just go ahead and do these. But here's just some examples of primary and precise problems. And in your head, you can think about this as well. So here's an example. There's children are using inappropriate language with a high frequency and in the presence of both adults and other children. This is creating a sense of disrespect and incivility in the school. So would that be primary or would that be precise? And the answer is it would be primary, because we need to know all of the answers. We need to know the who, what, when, where, and why. We haven't answered the who, we haven't answered the when, we haven't answered the where. Children says, okay, which children? all the children, or is it children in a certain grade? So it's missing the who, the when, the where, and the why. So it sounds good, but it's missing a lot of key components. Here's another one. Office referrals during December are higher than any other month. We haven't answered any of the questions. That may be true, but we haven't answered the who, what, when, where, and why of these office referrals during the month of December. So that's a primary statement. Whoopsie. Okay, here's one. Minor disrespect and disruption during the last 15 minutes of our 7th and 8th grade block periods are increasing. This pattern involves many students and appears to be maintained by peer attention. Okay, that's checking all the boxes, so that's precise. And you'll see there that that perceived motivation is one of the WH questions we need to answer about these particular statements. Here's James D. He's hitting others in the cafeteria during lunch for peer attention. That is a precise statement. Oh, and Michelle, I see that. Yep, you know what? I'll be happy to send Jay this PowerPoint. So I'm going to, oh, and I see here, Jay says I have a tier 1 booster in prep for. Earlier I was saying, Jay, did I lose you? Now I'm looking at chat. I see where I lost him. But yes, Michelle, I will make sure that we get these, I'll get these slides and the recording to Jay. So James D, he's hitting others in the cafeteria during lunch for peer attention. Precise statement. We know it answers all the who, what, when, where, and the why of his problem behavior. Here's another one. Whoopsie, I gave you the answer too fast. We have 7th, 3rd grade boys engaging in sexual harassment during recess because they think that boys rule. All right, it's primary because we've only answered the what. We only know what they're doing. So we need more specific on that. And 3 5th grade boys are name calling and touching girls inappropriately during playground recess in an attempt to obtain attention. Precise, it answers all the questions. Now, if this were my school, I'd say maybe we have a bigger issue here with these 3rd grade boys and these 5th grade boys, but you can just see the difference. These are just examples just to see the difference between precision statements that answer all of the questions, primary that might get to some, but it's leaving out some information. So it's really key that we answer just the who, what, when, where, and the why of problem behavior. And if I'm the data analyst on your team and I'm getting in and I'm aggregating this data and I am, starting to develop a precision statement, and I've got one from behavior in the cafeteria, but I'm also seeing another, some actions happening in our hallways. I'm bringing to you as my team a couple of different precision statements. I see a couple things going on here. So you as a team might need to prioritize these problems. So you may need to look at, which one is occurring more frequently, what's the trend on this problem behavior? Is a safety issue involved? Is it dangerous? Kind of like which problem is on fire? Maybe we need to deal with that one first. And then if we can get to the other one today, we will. If not, we can put that and keep an eye on that data that's happening in the hallway, and we can address that at our next team meeting. So you may have to prioritize depending on the severity or intensity of the problem behavior, especially if your data analyst is coming with more than one problem behavior to your team. So primary precision, hopefully that all makes sense. Again, answering those WH questions and getting really specific on exactly what's going on. Once your team has those specifics, then developing an action plan to me is like, it just kind of flows pretty naturally. You know what you're dealing with here. Okay, what can we do so we can say that things are better? And that's what we will get into that as well, that whole process of decision-making around those precision statements. So we start by looking at our graphs always and really wanting to make sure we're looking at graphs in the right format. So you heard me talk about average referrals per day per month. When we organize our data for decision making, we want to compare this data across time to help us analyze the trends. And so we want to move away from a total referral count to looking at the average referrals per day per month to get a true comparison, because every month has a different set of student contact dates. So if we looked at just a total, it doesn't give us a true comparison. Here's the total. Here's if we just looked at total numbers for every single month. And every month has a different number of school days. So we don't have that option to do a true comparison. I mean, look at here in December, we had, what is that, 70 referrals, but we were only in school for 2 weeks. So we want a true comparison, and that's why we first start with the average referrals per day per month. So now we can see that the months are different, but an average referral per day per month count will now allow us for those true comparisons. And then we can start to take a look at this overall. This is a snapshot of our school. How are things going? How are we doing? What month are we? Is there a certain month we're spiking in our referrals? Are we seeing an upward trend, a downward trend? This now starts us to be able to do a quick overall snapshot of just all the behaviors that are going on within our school. So that's where we want to start with looking at this report. I'm not sure, again, if you guys have this report or not. You might have something similar to it. Maybe it's called something different. In Swiss, it's called the average referrals per day per month. And so we always, when I train teams with Swiss and work with teams, I will say this is the first report that you want to go to. This is the very first report before you start getting into problem behavior, location, time of day, grade. Let's look at this because this is the overall look at our school and all of our data. So when we look at this report, we look at the fact, are we seeing trends? Are we seeing peaks? What's our data look like compared to last year? You know, how do we compare with the national or regional norms? So this is the place we want to start. And this report helps us answer these questions. So when we look at this report, this is a school and we are looking at the whole year. So we're seeing September all the way till June. In Swiss, what they do with Swiss is that people that keep their data in Swiss, if they agree to share that data, and when they agree to share the data, it's an optional data sharing option. And they basically say that, yep, you know, we will share our data with the Swiss developers. When they share data, it's anonymized. I believe that's the word. There's no school name, there's no district name, there's no staff name, there's no number, there's nothing. It's raw data that's just shared. But they use this data to create national norms. So now if I'm a K-8 school, I can pull this report and I can look and see, how is my data, how is my school doing compared with other K-8 schools that are keeping their data in Swiss. And so that's the information I can get from this report, from this average referrals per day per month report. And so when we look at this report, we want to see if there's a trend, if there are peaks, what are the levels compared to the national median. So we're seeing already here, we've got a little bit of an upward trend going from November, here's December, we were kind of climbing the charts here up through March. But we also see that things are looking better. From March to the remainder of the year, we had a better trend, a decreasing trend. We also saw that we had peaks in the month of December, February, and March. So you can go back and reflect on, you know, what was going on within this building during those periods of time that we're seeing those peaks and kind of spikes in behavior. And when we look at the national trend data on this report, we get a median score. We also get a 25th percentile and a 75th percentile. Again, this is comparing, let's say this is a K-8 school, comparing my data from my K-8 school, this is my school, with other schools, K-8, that also keep their, you know, sharing their data with Swiss. When I train teams to start with this report, beside looking at your trends and your peaks, and, you know, are we seeing upward, downward trends? Is there any one month that really pops out more than others? I also say, you know, use the national data to help us determine how are we doing in comparison. When we look at this graph, we want to be at or below the median score. That's where we want. That's kind of our goal, is to be at or below the median score. You can see that for a good part of this year, we were at or above the 75th percentile. But as the year went on, we got better. I mean, we started to see that decreasing trend. So this is a way to compare How is the school doing? If you didn't have any of this, you'd go, okay, all right, well, March was kind of a peak, but now we go ahead and put in that data. Now we see a better, truer comparison with other schools that are similar to ours. So that's your goal in this report, is you always want to be at or below the median score. But it also helps you point out, like we said, if there's particular peaks in data during a certain month, what your trends are. Are we climbing the charts? Are we going down? Are we seeing a decreasing trend? What does our data look at? I know when I was serving as my PBIS coordinator in my district, so we had 15 schools and we were Swiss schools. And I met quarterly with the superintendent, because that superintendent, who was very on board with PBIS, was very interested and wanted to see this data, and he wanted to see it from all the schools. So he had a binder, a PBIS, a Swiss binder with all the schools. And he was very interested in this report because he wanted to see the comparison with other elementary schools, the K-6, the junior high, the high school. He was very interested in that comparison data. So this was a report that I shared in detail with him on a quarterly basis. So then enabled him to be staying up to speed on what's going on with the schools and their discipline data. Here's another one. So we can see here that there's the median score. Now this is another school, September to February, but there's our median. Remember, our goal is to be at or below the median. And this school could say, based on this report, that our rate of problem behavior has been above the national median for schools our size every month this year. However, we are seeing a decreasing trend since November. So that's, let's celebrate those successes as well. This isn't all about, hey, what's going wrong? Because a lot of schools will put this data in and they'll look pretty good, but it's also celebrating your successes and realizing, where you need to kind of focus your efforts in your work. So we always say, start there first, get a good snapshot of what's happening overall in your school. If you have a graph similar to that in your system, fabulous. If you don't, that's okay. See if there's some way maybe you can get a type of report that looks at your overall school-wide data, because that's kind of what this is, looking at your overall school-wide data. And now it comes down to story gathering, basically gathering all the information. So if I'm the data analyst, I saw that, I kind of see a good snapshot and overall picture of my school. Now I'm going to start to get real specific and start to, you're putting a story together, you're putting a picture together, you're starting to develop. Basically, a precision statement is a hypothesis statement saying, hey, when I get in and look at this data, this is what I'm seeing. And so we start with those core reports. Think about those core reports we saw earlier on that showed the average referrals per day per month. We looked at that by problem behavior, location, time, student, grade, day of week. Those are all the core reports. So when we look at those core reports, that can be a jumping off place for your data analyst to start to identify some potential problems or some red flags. So we look at, what problem behaviors are most common. That's looking at that problem behavior report. Where are they most likely to occur? That's the location. When is the time of day? Who's engaging? That's the referrals by student. And then in Swiss, they have a feature called drill down, data drill down. And the data drill down feature is a separate feature that takes all this information and you can start to filter it into the drill down feature. So it's kind of like you think about drilling into your data or data mining to answer the final, why are the problem behaviors sustaining? There is no perceived motivation report because the perceived motivation is going to look different depending on the context of the problem. So that's why we use that drill down feature in Swiss to answer that question of, in this particular context, once we know the problem behavior, location, time, student, why is it happening? Why is this problem behavior happening in this context? So in Swiss, they use this drill down feature to answer that why question. So it's really about asking all the right questions. Again, you might hear, the buzz around the school might be, we're seeing too many referrals in the classrooms. So your questions now become, okay, which classrooms? Is it all the classrooms or is it a certain grade? Is it a lot of students or is it a few students? What are the problem behaviors occurring in the classroom? What particular time of day are they occurring? There's so many questions to ask around this primary statement of there's too many referrals in the classrooms. We need to get specific, or too many in the cafeteria. So which grades? We have A, B, and C lunch. Is it all of them, or is it only A lunch? Is it at the beginning of A lunch or the end? Is it involving lots of kids or a small number of kids? And what's going on in A lunch at the beginning? Questions we all need to know. So we start to look at some of these core reports, referrals by problem behavior. This is just a sample report, and it just leads you to what questions when you're looking at this report of referrals by problem behavior. Well, I'm looking at, is there one major problem behavior or multiple behaviors? Are they student to student or student to adult? Are we seeing a similarity here? So in this example, here's physical aggression. So you see PAGG, that stands for physical aggression. But then our next behaviors are defiance and minor defiance. That capital M in Swiss next to defiance indicates a minor problem behavior. So we've got defiant behaviors, both major and minor, occurring right behind physical aggression. Then we're seeing harassment. We're also seeing some minor contact. So by looking at your problem behaviors, are we seeing groupings of behaviors? Is there one behavior that's popping up over all the others? Are they majors? Are they minors? And I'm hoping in your system, whatever system you're keeping your data in, you differentiate between major and minor problem behavior. Major office managed, minor classroom managed. So if not, something to consider, to think about, and that kind of takes me a step back to a component, a core tier 1 component of, do we have a T-chart? Do we have a T-chart that defines out and spells clearly major office managed behaviors, minor classroom or teacher managed behaviors? So if we have that T-chart, everybody has that common understanding of what's major and what's minor. Then when we start to report those behaviors, we're all on that same page. We all have good, clean, clear data because we know the difference between minor contact and major, minor disruption and major disruption. So that's kind of like taking a step back there, but really making sure that everybody's clear and that's well defined when we're tracking major and minor problem behavior. Here's a report on location. So in looking at this, I can see the majority of the problem behaviors are coming from the classroom, which makes sense. This doesn't surprise me because that's where the kids spend most of their days, are in the classroom. But you can also see that we've got playground and hallway and cafeteria and even the bus. These are now kind of grouping type of locations that are non-structured. They're unstructured type of settings. And so you'll see there that when kids are, a large number of kids in an unstructured setting, such as playground, hallway, cafeteria, that's where we're seeing the next group of problem behaviors. So this just will point out to you, is it one location or is it many? Are we seeing a cluster? Where are these problem behaviors occurring? And we see here right now, we've got a little bit of a cluster here with these less structured settings. Referrals by time. So is there a particular time of day when our problem behaviors are occurring? And when you look at this report, think about, how does your schedule and activities match up with this? So in this example, we're seeing a lot of problems between 10 and 11:30. So what's happening in our schedule between 10 and 11:30? Are we seeing, is this transition time? Is this time when kids are starting to go to the cafeteria? How do the activities match up with what's happening at this particular time of day? So an important report as well. Referrals by student. Again, I'm not sure if your system collects this. This is a report that is available in Swiss. Again, looking at the portion of students that have 0 to 1 office referrals, that have 2 to 5 or 6 or more. Again, using this as a screener to indicate which students are in need of higher level supports. You can see here that 2 students may benefit from individualized support from tier 3. We have another group of 9 students that might be candidates for some type of a tier 2 support. And then of course you see the rest of your students here that are in a 0 to 1 office referral range. So it's a good tool, this particular report, as just kind of a screening tool to look at maybe on a monthly basis, maybe every couple weeks, just so some kids aren't slipping through the cracks. You might have a student that, garnered 4 office referrals in a 2-week period of time. We want to be on that. We want to catch them. 2 to 5, and this kiddo's had 4 in 2 weeks. Okay, that tells me that we need to get that student into some type of a tier 2 intervention pretty quickly before it continues and escalates and referrals just start racking up for that student. And then finally, that final question, talked a little bit about this, is the one we haven't talked about. We've looked at how often, which is the average referrals per day per month. We've looked at the referrals by problem behavior, the location, the time, and the students. But the one that we haven't talked about is the most difficult. It's the hardest question, and it's why. Why is this happening? It's the last one, but it's the one that I think is pretty important because it helps put everything else in perspective and understanding of why this problem behavior is happening in this context. So when we talk about perceived motivation, it's, what's maintaining the problem behavior. In a school setting, basically perceived motivation is going to fall into 2 different categories. Students are either trying to obtain something or avoid something. They're trying to obtain adult attention, peer attention, maybe obtain an item or an activity, could be sensory, or they're trying to avoid an adult, avoid a peer, avoid an activity, avoid a task. If you see a pattern of every time math class, Brian is causing a disturbance because he knows he's going to get sent to the office for math, that, you can start to connect those dots pretty quickly and easily, that Brian is behaving in this way because he's trying to avoid the task. He knows he's going to get sent out. He's very happy to spend math time in the office chatting it up with the secretary, and he's just avoided the task and, got his needs met in the way of avoidance. So the why is, and the perceived motivation is absolutely key in helping us understand what's maintaining this problem behavior. Why are we seeing this problem behavior occur? And we assess this only after we've defined the who, the what, the when, and the where. Because now we answer, why are students misbehaving in this particular context? We know that we have a large number of 4th graders out on the playground at noon engaging in physical aggression and fighting. That's all of that. Why? Well, when we look at the why with these 4th graders at noon engaging in physical aggression and fighting out on the playground, to obtain peer attention. So the why answers, why is this problem behavior happening in this particular context? Why are the students misbehaving in this context? So in that example I just threw out, it was to obtain peer attention. So they're engaging in that inappropriate behavior out on the playground. So are there multiple motivations suspected? There could be, but we really want to look for the primary motivation, okay? So if we look at a couple of examples, this is an elementary school example. And often what you will find is that motivation for many elementary students that are engaging in disruption in the classroom is obtaining peer attention. So often you will see the elementary students either obtaining peer attention, obtaining adult attention. It's all about getting attention for those elementary kiddos versus our middle school, where it's more about avoiding the task. Doesn't surprise me in the least. And this is, again, kind of that perceived motivation for those middle students that are non-compliant and insubordination in the classroom. So our middle school students, task avoidance. And then you'll see next is obtaining peer attention, but generally trying to avoid the task at all costs. So you'll see a little bit of difference there between your elementary and your middle students. This is a student dashboard. This is a report that is also available within the Swiss system, and it just summarizes everything that's in there for one student in Swiss. And you also see in this summary of the student his motivation. So we do see his motivation for his referrals, as well as where was he receiving the referrals, what time of day, what day of week. It's all of his summary. So motivation is included in that student dashboard. And wanted to point out that there's a lot of resources around motivation, because it's key that if we're going to collect this data from teachers, we need to provide information so they're really informed in understanding what perceived motivation is all about, understanding, function-based thinking with students and behaviors. So these are on, this is on pbisapps.org, and it's a nice resource under the Teach by Design. And it's an article about, and it's called Why Are My Students Doing That? And it's a lot about function. This is also a website here through Portland State that they did a lot of e-learning modules around the function of behavior. This is key. Function of behavior is so key. If we can start to bring function of students' behavior down to a tier 1 level, then as we have students who have higher level needs, and we get to that point where we're developing we're looking at the function of behavior to develop an individual behavior support plan. We are very familiar with function of behavior because we're utilizing that at a tier 1 level, at a universal level. So just wanted to point out those resources, because as I said earlier, if we're going to ask our teachers to start to understand motivation and what students are trying to get or get away from, we want to provide them all the resources if we're going to be collecting this data from them. Because the last thing we want is for them under that required field to go, I don't know what the motivation is. I don't know, unknown, don't know. And actually in Swiss, those are 2 options. If we went to Swiss and we were filling out a referral and I got to the perceived motivation drop-down box, it says avoid a task, avoid a peer, adult attention, but then it says unknown and don't know. And you really want your teacher to really be informed with what motivation is all about, so they can make their best guess about perceived motivation. Because if we just see a lot of unknown and don't know, it doesn't give us a lot of good information to go on as we're looking at a student with potential problem behaviors. So before we go into the next section, any questions on the precision statements or any of the graphs that we just looked at, anything that was just kind of covered before we move into our next section? Okay, and if anything comes to you later, jot it down. This is recorded. You'll have a copy of this. You can go back and review it, or feel free to reach out to Jay or myself if any other questions come up. So now we move into our goal and how we build a solution around that. Okay, so here's where we were all this time, identifying our problems with precision, looking at our data, getting the specifics, finding out that we have a large number of 4th graders out on the playground at noon, engaging in physical aggression and fighting in an attempt to obtain peer attention. Boom, there's our precision statement. Now we need to start to work as a team to establish our goal. Remember, our data analysts developed that precision statement, that hypothesis statement, before we ever came together as a team. They had time beforehand, and we want to make sure that our data analyst has time, that they have time to be able to get in and aggregate the data. They have time to get to a precision statement, a hypothesis statement, and bring that to your team and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some action on the playground. When I really got in and looked at it and started to aggregate this data, it's our 4th graders. So here's the problem behavior. Great. Now we're meeting as a team. We next want to establish our goal. So in establishing our goal, before we can even set our goal, we need to know what our current reality is. What's our current levels? So if I go back to that playground scenario, we're going to ask our data analysts, well, okay, so in this last month, how many problem behaviors were from that playground? There were 30 office referrals from those 4th graders out on the playground in the last month. We know now what our current level is. We've got to know that. It's like you need to know where you're at right now to be able to set your goal. So it's like, what's your current reality? Now, based on that, you can go ahead and set your goal. And when you think about setting your goal, you think and you have a discussion in your team is, what's good enough? What number or what reduction or what percentage or whatever will be good enough to this team to say, Check it off. We can move on to another problem. Things are much better on the playground with those fourth graders. We can now move on to a different problem if there is one. So the goal you set is going to lead to your solution. It's really going to help guide your solution, but you need to set your goal. And so know what your current reality is. Find out exactly what's going on with that precision statement that spells out the context of the problem behavior and the function of it. Now we know what our goal is. Okay, what our current reality is. Now we set our goal, and that goal is going to guide our solution. So here's just a couple of examples. Here's the problem at the school. They saw and they found that many students were leaving garbage in the cafeteria, resulting in a lot of conflict, a lot of aggression, office referrals. And they found when they did their drill down, when they got to their precision statement, that the behavior is maintained by task avoidance. These kids don't want to go back to class after lunchtime. So they're milling around, they're leaving garbage, they're getting into a lot of aggressive behaviors, conflict. So what's the current status? Well, in this cafeteria with this problem behavior, there were 22 office referrals this last month in the cafeteria. And Heidi is our cafeteria supervisor. We asked her and she rated the cafeteria as a 1, which is low, which is like it's kind of a pigsty on a cleanliness scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, wow, this place looks great. 1, it like, oh my goodness, garbage is everywhere. So she's rating it pretty low, and we're seeing a lot of office referrals. So this is our problem behavior as a team. Our data analysts got in, aggregated the data, brought this precision statement to our team. We need to set a goal based on our current status. So as a team, we agreed that, okay, we want to see less than 5 office referrals in this next month from the cafeteria. And we want Heidi to rate our cafeteria as 4 or greater 2 weeks in a row. So that is our goal. That's what we're shooting for. As a team, we're going to say, we got a problem in the cafeteria, but if we can go this next month and see 5 or less office referrals and see it a lot cleaner, we're good. We've met our goal. Things are better. Check it off the list. We move on. So the goal is like, what do we need to shoot for to say that things are better? That things are much better. Behavior is much better in this particular problem context. Here's another one. We have 7th grade students are tardy for their 5th period class after lunch. Okay, and that tardiness is rewarded by peer attention. So they're getting a lot from their peers and nothing's really happening to them. They just roll into class whenever they roll into class. So where are we at currently? Well, 5 out of 6 of those 7th grade teachers indicate that they have more than 3 students that are tardy on a regular basis during that 5th period. And an estimated 18 of 7th grade students were tardy for 5th period. So now we know our current status, which helps us as a team set our goal. Well, first of all, we need a real consistent system of reporting tardies. And we want to make sure that we're going to see in the next month fewer than 10 referrals from those 7th graders. So in the next month for that 5th period. So our goal is determined based on what our current status says. So the goal is the first place we go to. We establish our goal. Once we establish our goal, now we're ready to start to develop a solution. So we know what the problem is. We know where we want to be. This is how we're going to get there. What are we going to do to make this happen? So that's now starting to develop an action plan. This is the solution development. That's why I say, when you meet as a team, you might only have 45 or 60 minutes. If you're establishing a goal, developing a solution, and now it's setting some fidelity and outcome measures, this is going to take your whole time. So you can't take your precious meeting minute time just starting to look at your problems. That's why your data analyst needs to get in and bring that precision statement to the team ahead of time. Then you have your time here where now you establish your goal and you're developing your solutions or your action plan. So there's several critical components you want to just address in your solution development. And the next couple of slides kind of spell those out. Prevention is number 1. I said that a little bit earlier. If you can predict it, you can prevent it. Is there anything we can do to avoid the problem behavior from ever occurring in the first place? You know, if we went back to that example of the cafeteria and we found out it was a lunch, do we need to change some schedules? Maybe we found when we looked at that problem behavior, there's not enough places for the kids to sit in a lunch. It's overcrowded. But C lunch, there's hardly anybody in there. So can we change some schedules to move some of those kids to C lunch? And now everybody's got a place to sit and we're not seeing that aggressive behavior as they're fighting over chairs. Or do we need to do a change in curriculum? Is there something we can do to avoid a problem behavior from ever occurring in the first place? That's the best place to start, is prevention. And then there's teaching. You know, is there going to be a teaching component? There usually is in an action plan, a teaching component. If I go back to my fourth graders on the playground, we may ask our PE teacher when the fourth graders are out there, because the weather's still pretty nice and they're outside during PE class, if he can take some time during his PE class to teach appropriate, reteach appropriate behavioral expectations out on the playground. And let's just teach it to all the fourth graders. And then we're going to ask our, playground workers to, teach expectations to fourth graders. So what teaching component is part of this plan? Recognition, how are we going to reward positive behaviors? We can ask our playground folks that are out there with those fourth graders to really reinforce our fourth graders very heavily that are engaging in appropriate playground behaviors. So we want to reinforce and recognize that. So these are just some of those various solution components that we want to address and keep in mind as we're developing our action plan. The main thing is, let's keep it simple. Don't feel like you have to have this big, involved, and long, and lengthy, and detailed action plan. Do the littlest you can to get the biggest effect. So it can be a very simple plan. As I just mentioned with those fourth graders, we're going to ask the PE teacher to reteach expectations to all the fourth graders. We're going to ask our playground workers to reinforce heavily with our school-wide reinforcement system. Students are behaving appropriately, fourth graders out on the playground. That's pretty simple. A couple different components to that action plan, but it's pretty simple. You want to keep it as simple as possible. And then addressing extinction. We want to prevent the problem behavior from being rewarded as it has been in the past. How do we respond to problem behavior? What type of a discipline system do we have in place within our building that we're going to utilize to respond to any problem behaviors? And then evaluate it. How are we going to evaluate it? So those are the various solution components to address. I think the biggest pieces here are prevention, teaching, recognition. How are we going to prevent that problem behavior? What's our teaching component? Teaching component is like, who's going to do what, by when? How are we going to recognize and reinforce? And then the rest is just that discipline system that we already have in place. And the last few pieces are then assessing fidelity and outcome measure, which is kind of where we're going next. So we've developed a solution. We know what we're going to ask our PE teacher to do, our playground folks to do. Okay, now we need to implement the solution. We've got a pretty good plan. We think we have a good plan for these groups of kids outside. Now we're going to implement the solution with integrity and fidelity. Basically, again, when you hear the word in implementing with fidelity, it's just, are the adults doing what they said they were going to do? That's all fidelity measure is are we doing what we said we would do? So we need to implement this with fidelity, doing what we said. If we develop a great action plan as a team and it's not implemented with fidelity, when we look at our data a month from now, nothing's going to change. A quick example of this is a high school team that looked at their data and they saw that a lot of kids were late to class. Surprise. So they got together, they developed an action plan, and they said, hey, we're seeing lots of tardies and kids late to class. We're going to ask all of our teachers to get out into the hallway and to, every time the bell rings and it's a passing period, get out there and really move kids along, kind of hustle them back to class. Give them a reminder, 1 minute to go, let's go, let's go. And if we get everybody out there and doing that, we think we can really reduce our tardies. Great plan. What happened is it didn't happen. it wasn't implemented with fidelity. When they checked their data the next month, they saw that nothing changed. In fact, things were getting a little bit worse. When they did a quick check of their staff at a staff meeting, said, hey, you guys, were you able to get out there and do that? They're like, no, it didn't work for me. I have kids coming, I have kids going, kids asking questions, I'm giving homework. I didn't have time to get out there every time. And so they found out that their plan, as good as they thought it was not a good contextual fit for their staff. It just wasn't going to work. And they found that out pretty quickly, that it was not implemented with fidelity. So we want to make sure we're building in a fidelity measure to know that, is this a good fit? Is this going to work? Are the adults who have a role in this plan actually carrying it out? So we do need to set a fidelity measure, and that's just part of our plan. And I'll go ahead and put these up here so we can take a look at these. Okay, and so in the fidelity, again, it's just asking, are we implementing the plan? So how are we going to collect fidelity? Again, let's keep this simple as well. You can use a percent, a Likert scale of 1 to 5. 1, I never did it. 5, I did it every single day. You can measure it monthly, weekly. You want to make it easy. You want to make it easy as possible for your staff. If we're asking our staff to get out and reteach students expectations in the hallway, I can put a sheet up in the teacher's lounge. When you did it, when you got your students back out there and you retaught expectations in the hallway, could you go ahead and just initial and date when you did it? That's a fidelity check. That's a fidelity measure right there. So you want to keep fidelity measure for your staff pretty simple, pretty easy to collect this data. So here's a couple of examples, okay? This top example here, we asked our teachers if they would do high five greetings to all the students that entered their class in the morning. So we asked them at the end of the week, were you able to do that? Well, nope, this one, yeah, a little bit. And most of the people were here kind of in the middle. So we're really not yet to implementing this and carrying this plan out to fidelity. We're partially there. We're kind of partially implementing, but we want to see all of our dots in the 4 and 5. That gives us that 80% that we're looking for. So we want to see, in this case, we would see all of our dots in the 4 and 5 region to give us that 80%. Here's another example. This is just a sheet that we put up in the teacher's lounge and asked the teachers to check. How many days during the week did you review with students the procedures for passing in the hall? And again, we're getting there. It's partially implemented, but we're really not completely fully implementing to fidelity. And that's key, because the only way our plan that we developed, our action plan, is going to work is if it's actually being implemented with fidelity. And then finally, your last piece is kind of your outcome data. So what outcome data are we going to look at? Well, if our goal was to reduce the problem behaviors by 50%, then we need to see that data to show, are we less than 50%? If I go back to my playground example, and on the playground example, we had 30 referrals from that location from those 4th graders. The goal that team set is we want 10 or under in the next month. So we meet again in another month. Before we start to talk about a new problem behavior our data analyst has seen in the hallway, we're going to ask our data analyst to bring the data for those 4th graders out on the playground. What is our data showing? And that data analyst is going to bring that follow-up data to tell us if we hit our goal. Are we under 10 or under on referrals from those 4th graders out on the playground? If so, we know that we've hit our mark. We're good to go. We can take this problem behavior off of our books and we move on to a new one in the hallway. If not, if we're getting there, then we adjust our plan. Do we need to tweak the plan in any way? Do we need to adjust it or change it? If we're seeing things are not better at all, then we check fidelity of implementation. Hey, Mr. PE teacher, did you teach the expectations like we taught? Or we asked you to teach those 4th graders? Playground folks, did you reinforce the kids behaving appropriately on the playground like we asked? Was this plan carried out with fidelity? Probably not if we're not seeing anything improve with those students out on the playground. So that outcome data, we need to determine what outcome data we're going to ask our data analyst to bring to the next meeting to enable us to know if this plan has been effective. And so again, these are those solution components. Is there a prevention piece? What's a teaching piece as part of this? Recognition. And then here's that final, that what I was just talking about, the data collection. What data are we going to collect to know that things are better? Who's responsible for gathering that data? For the most part, it's your data analyst who's going to bring this data to the team to let us know. And then here's an example. So here's an example of the goal here was tardies in the hallways, and the goal was reducing it by 50%. That's what their problem behavior was. They were seeing a lot of problem behaviors in the hallways and tardies. So they set their goal. So here's their action plan based on that goal. Prevention, look at that prevention piece. Can we do anything to prevent the problem behavior from happening? Well, they start out by saying, how about if we increase supervision? Yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer. Let's get more people out there. And the vice principal is also available at that time to monitor the hallway. And they asked the grade levels if they would establish a rotation between the classes. So not everybody out there, but just let's rotate. So this is my week, or this is my day. I know Monday I get out there and I'm gonna, supervise and get kids to class on time. That's a good prevention plan for reducing tardies in the hallway by 50%. Here's their teaching plan. They're going to reteach those behavioral expectations of the hallway, and they're going to retrain staff on identifying possible motivation. So again, I mentioned that a little bit earlier about how key that is, having a good PD plan in place for your staff to understand perceived motivation and really know the importance of being able to identify the possible motivation with a problem behavior in a specific context. Here's their recognition. They were going to increase recognition for appropriate behavior. So that means use those school-wide reinforcers and really make sure we're handing those out at a high rate to students who are behaving appropriately in the hallway. They're going to provide feedback tickets to students. So those recognition, those reinforcers, whether it's a ticket or a token, that kids can use to purchase spirit wear at the school. And they were also going to have a dance party for the classroom with the fewest referrals. So they kind of work that into their plan. Then how are they going to prevent the problem behavior from being rewarded in the form of extinction? Well, they said they were going to post weekly Swiss data, grade level Swiss data, and encourage all students to work for that dance party. So kind of we're all in this together, all working together. They were going to use their ODRs that they've always used for their corrective consequences. That's their discipline system. They're going to continue those early consequences. And then data collection. What data are we going to use to collect to know if we've hit our goal? So if you address each one of these solution components, you pretty much have your action plan here set. And then the next piece is just to take it that step further to indicate who's responsible, when's it going to be done. So that's a key piece of who's responsible for this. So we need to really identify some specific people that are going to be responsible for carrying out these action steps. By when? Let's set a date. We need to know, are we going to review this in a month? Is it going to be 2 months? How will we measure fidelity? How are we going to know that the adults are doing what they said they would do? We need to address fidelity and actually build in a fidelity measure in some way. And then any additional notes or updates, and then data. What data are we going to collect? What data will we collect and look at in a month, if that's our timeline, with our goal to know that things are better? So it's just really making sure that we flesh out our action plan to include who's going to do what, by when, in what time frame, how are we measuring our fidelity, and what outcome data are we looking at? And finally, I want to just point this out to you. And when I give Jay this PowerPoint, I'm going to give him this as well. This is a TIPS meeting minute form. I mentioned TIPS, Team Initiated Problem Solving, that was developed out of the University of Oregon. And everything that we've just done in the last hour and a half has been the problem solving process piece of it. Developing a problem with precision, getting that precision statement, the goal with the timeline, your action plan, your fidelity measure. Those are all of those pieces to a precision statement. when they were working with teams and wanting to get them, using this process, they found that they didn't have anything to really accurately keep track of what was happening in their meeting. So they developed this meeting minute form. And we always like to just offer this as a resource. If you are not using anything in specifically or anything in particular to track what's going on with your team when you meet, we offer this as a resource and consider using this when your team meets. At first glance, it looks like kind of a lot, but you're not tied into these boxes because they all expand. So you can type in as much as possible. And if you look at it in a little bit detail, this whole top section here of this tips form, where it says today's meeting, next meeting, the date, the time, the location, the facilitator, the minute taker, the data analyst. All of that can be filled in ahead of time by your minute taker. We don't need to take our meeting minutes doing that. So that can be filled in ahead of time. The team members on your team, their names can be there. Whoever's in attendance, I can put a little check next to their name. They were there. Agenda items, again, can be all addressed and put in there ahead of time. We're going to talk about this, this, and this today. So all of this can be done before your team ever meets. So where your team is spending your time is here under where it says precision or problem solving process. That's what you're doing as a team. You'll see right here, it says right on the form, precision problem statement. And what I like this meeting minute agenda is the prompts are right there as well. Your who, what, when, where, why, and how often of the problem behavior. This is what your data analyst is aggregating your data ahead of time and bringing to the team. And actually, if I'm your data analyst and I see that I've got a large number of fourth graders out on the playground at noon engaging in physical aggression and fighting to obtain peer attention, I can give that precision statement to my minute taker ahead of time. So when we meet as a team and my minute taker connects to a projection so we can all see this meeting minute form, we see right there, there's the problem behavior we need to work on. That's what we need to develop an action plan around. So as a data analyst, it's already on there. I gave it to my minute taker ahead of time. I'm now guiding a discussion with you guys around what's going on in the playground. And now as a team, these last three columns are where we're really going to focus our efforts. We're going to set a goal with a timeline. We're going to develop an action plan. Who's going to do what by when? We're setting our fidelity measure, and what outcome data are we going to look at to know if things are better? This is where we spend our time then, right here on this meeting minute form as a team. Then you'll see here where it says implement solutions. Now we implement the solution. We're coming back a month from now. It's a month from now, we meet, there's a new problem, precision statement about hallways, but we're not going to tackle that just yet. We want to see how are things on the playground. And so who is bringing this data? Our data analyst. They are bringing the fidelity data. They're letting us know if this action plan we developed for those fourth graders on the playground was implemented with fidelity. And what is our outcome data showing us? Are things worse? Is there no change? Are things improved but not to goal? Have we met our goal? So we want to make sure we follow up on that previous problem before we ever take on a new one. Otherwise, we're just, we're taking on one new problem after another. Let's, click them off one at a time. Let's see where we're at with that previous problem before we ever start to, tackle a new problem. So our data analyst is not only bringing us new potential problems, but they're bringing us the follow-up data to a problem and an action plan from a month ago or 2 months ago to let us know, was it implemented with fidelity, and what does our outcome data show us? So I will, as I said, I'll make sure that Jay has a copy of this. He may even have it, but I'll make sure he also gets a copy of this tips meeting minute form. I want to stop share for a minute, and I'm going to